ask you first, 6 years ago when you set up, well, first we should describe what Lime is. And we associate it mostly with micromobility, so scooters. Would that be a good description of what Lime does?
Yeah, so we're the world's largest micromobility operator. And so people think of us as a scooter company, but we think of ourselves as any form of green transportation. So we're the biggest scooter operator in the world. We're the biggest e-bike operator outside of China. We have an electric moped business. And so any form of lightweight electric vehicles, and we operate on multiple continents, 30 plus countries.
30 plus countries, and you founded 6 years ago. At that time, what was your vision for cities?
Well, I think that the reason why Lime is so important is because when we look at the challenges with city, the biggest challenge we face, and so many speakers have mentioned, is the challenge of climate change. The biggest source of carbon pollution in the United States and in Europe is transportation. 29% of carbon pollution in the United States, 25% in Europe. The vast majority of that comes from the use of personal cars and trucks. And if you actually look at the conversation about how do we solve this, so much of the last decade has been about how do we go from gas cars to electric cars. The problem is that actually doesn't solve the issue. Because the reason why cars consume so much energy is because it's heavy. The average car is 2,000 kilograms. And so when I use a 2,000 kilogram tank to move a 70 kilogram human, all the energy is in moving the car. That's the fundamental physics problem. And if all we do is go from gas cars to electric cars, we're just shifting the energy source from one to the other. And today, the vast majority of the world's electricity is not renewable. Less than 30% is renewable. 40% of the world's electricity comes from coal. If you go to places like China and India, the majority of the electricity comes from coal. If all we did was move from gas cars to electric cars and increase adoption, we will exacerbate the problem of transportation's impact on climate. And this is why we thought Lime needs to exist. How do we bring more people to reduce their reliance on cars and to get into lightweight electric vehicles? Micromobility, the micro is the weight. And we know there are energy efficient cities around the world. They embrace public transportation and they get a lot of their folks on bikes and scooters, and that's our mission. We want to get more people and offer them simple choices, shared micromobility. There are no more excuses. We need to change our own behavior, and that's Lime's mission.
Okay, so just explain to me exactly how the economics of Lime work. Who pays what, when, and how much does it cost you to buy the scooter in the first place?
Yeah, so our average trip is $4, $4.50. And the rider, you can download an app, walk up to any of our scooters and bikes. We work with cities to bring these shared micromobility into our cities. And it's, I think, Tanya, you and I were chatting earlier, it's been a journey on the unit economic side. I think one of the raps against this industry is that, yeah, I see the benefit, but the business seems kind of upside down. And when I started, at Lime, our average scooter only lasted 30 days. Imagine that. You have to buy an entire fleet every 30 days. And
so what was happening to them?
They were being broken. We took a personal use scooter and e-bike and took it into a shared space. But last year, we hit our first EBITDA positive year. This year, we're on track to get to free cash flow positive. And the reason why is because we've invested in that hardware. We built the scooters and e-bikes to last longer, to be more durable, to use less spare parts, so that we are living up to the mission, each scooter, each e-bike. And so today, the economics, we're actually on path to really bring forth the first profit. We are already the first profitable shared micromobility business. And now when you have a profitable business that meets that mission, this is when you really unlock that power.
And how do you get customers to engage in the first place? What is it about your logistics that makes them want to use not just a scooter, but your scooter?
Yeah, great question. I think how do we get people to use not just a scooter, our scooter? I think there's two things. One is the hardware itself. All of our competitors buy off the shelf from the same two Chinese manufacturers. So I think, Tanya, you're in London, there are other e-bikes manufacturers. They're all exactly the same because they're exactly the same bike.
Right.
5 years ago, one of the big decisions early on is, do we buy from the same Chinese manufacturers or do we develop in-house? That is an expensive decision. And when you're a startup, a lot of people say, I just buy off the shelf. But the problem with buying off the shelf is that there's a fundamental conflict. If my business is to sell you more scooters and parts, I'm not so incentivized to make them last as long as possible. I'm not so incentivized to make it as safe as possible, as rider-focused as possible. So we develop our own hardware, and it's expensive, but now it's paying dividends because we put riders first, safety first. It lasts longer than anyone else. You go to London, the best e-bike, hands down, it's the Lime e-bikes there. So that's one. The second, you mentioned operations. Operations is so crucial. When you look at a great company like Amazon, people are like, what is Amazon's core competency? I think they're the world's greatest tech-enabled operations company. The ability to take tens of millions of SKUs, deliver it to your home with almost no defects, under 24 hours, increasingly under 1 hour. That is the vision of Lime. We have technology-enabled operations city by city. Every scooter out in the field, we have a point system on how likely are we going to lose it. We have a tracking on battery. Every mechanic has a score. We look at how quickly do they fix things, what's the quality of the fix, how many spare parts do they use, and we deploy constantly moving our scooters and e-bikes around so that we have it in the places that you want to use it. So you go to a place like almost every city we're in, we have the same fleet as our competitors. In Paris, we have 65% market share. In London, we have 80% market share with the same fleet because we run the best operation with the best hardware.
Right, so what does that mean specifically? What is it that you are doing that your competitors are not doing? And managing the fleet is a very important aspect, isn't it?
For sure. I mean, the hardware investment is one big piece. We build in-house versus we buy off the shelf. We also focus a lot on how do we have the best operations out there. Every single scooter, every single e-bike, we want to make sure that we bring it back, not just because it's good for business, it's also really important for our sustainability goals. And every single warehouse, you walk into our warehouse, we're tracking every single behavior. At the end of the day, the worst you want is, if as a mechanic in a warehouse, I may not know I'm doing something wrong. I may not know I am not reaching the very best of what my capabilities are. Everything we do in our warehouse, we track on our app, and at the end of the day, we give you a scorecard. Here are the things, Tanya, I'd like you to do better. Here are the things I'd like you to do less of, more of, and every manager gets their mechanics ranked from first to last. And if you're last, we say, you gotta improve, and if you don't, we make a change. That level of precision and tech-enabled operations really have separated us from the competitors.
So a couple of barriers. I mean, you've had to change the environment a little bit, haven't you, in terms of your negotiation with cities, because you are using public roads, obviously, or pavements in the case of some people when they're riding a scooter. So how have you had those negotiations, and what skill have you required to achieve in them?
Yeah, so we're in 300 cities because of the support of the cities we're in. Almost all the cities we're in, there's a competitive RFP process, and we've approached that really as a partnership. If you talk to city officials, transportation officials, you ask them, what are your biggest challenges in your city? They would talk to you about congestion, they would talk to you about parking, they would talk to you about climate change. And the great thing is, if you want to solve parking, if you want to solve congestion, if you want to truly tackle climate change, we can bring those solutions to you. And so each of these cities, we've built up an incredible relationship. There are always, of course, back and forth, and there's feedback that we can do better. But we partner with cities to get our products out. The other thing that we often do is we have to, frankly, sometimes educate our city official friends. I think, Tanya, you and I were talking about like parking of scooters and e-bikes.
Right.
I get tagged on social media almost every single day. Somebody would tag an e-bike, and they're so angry. This e-bike is outside of my house. Get this out of here. And invariably, any picture behind that bike, there's cars parked back to back to back to back. But they don't see the cars because we're used to the idea that cars should have a right onto our streets. But that e-bike for them is an eyesore. But is that really what's creating the parking issues? In London, across all the various operators, there's between 30 and 40,000 e-bikes. There's 2.6 million cars in the city of London. And sometimes you have to have that conversation. We're not used to thinking about sharing the road. We're not used to thinking about bike lanes on every single street. We're not used to challenging whether or not cars have a right to park on every street, down every block. And bikes are new, so we're a little, and so people are like, what's the challenge with parking with bikes? Well, I'll tell you, there's almost no city in Europe and the United States where the problem is too much bike parking. The problem is too much car parking, but you gotta have those conversations with cities as well.
There's also the question of how people treat things. I mean, this is a cultural change too, is that you see them damaged or disposed of. You said that you were going through fleets very quickly at the beginning. If people don't value them, they then become rubbish and they mess up our environment. But they also, because you have to manufacture more, that is also a cost to the environment.
No, absolutely. You're absolutely right. And I think one of the things that I think for us to have earned the right to talk about the mission of decarbonization of transportation, we got to hold ourselves to account. And one of the things that we did was every single year we put out our own carbon report with third party, and we'd look at exactly what you're talking about. I think early days, what people oftentimes did was they would take the dirtiest part of their business, they kick it out to a third-party supplier, and they say, wait, we're all clean.
Sure.
We look at everything upstream, downstream, and the biggest source of carbon pollution for us is the manufacturing of our e-bikes and our e-scooters. And the great thing here, though, is sometimes I hear people talk about kind of their sustainability goals, and it sounds like it sounds in opposition to their profitability goals. But actually, for so many companies, those things go hand in hand. So we've been fighting to make our scooters and bikes last longer so they don't break on the side of the road. But do you know what? That's also great for the bottom line. When scooters last 1 month, that's bad for business, it's bad for the environment. When they last 5 years, this is how we get to profitability. And every single year, we put this report out. The last report, the average trip on Lime produces less than 7% of the equivalent carbon emissions of a car trip. 93% reduction, pretty good, not good enough. Not good enough. We want to get that number to 1%. And every single year, we look at the dirtiest part of our own system, we hold ourselves accountable, and then we say, how do we do better?
Cities also are changing in their structure. You've alluded to this, that we are seeing more pedestrianised areas and cars forced out of the centre of cities. But there's pushback against that too, isn't it? But it's something that is moving in your direction, which is conducive.
There's always pushback. And I think when people think about the trend, Tanya, you're describing, kind of like getting cars out of center, I think that the probably ideal cities are probably the Amsterdams, the Copenhagen.
Well, I was about to ask you. I mean, if you look at the States, there's very much, in many cities, an attitude that the road is exactly what you have said. It is for cars. And if pedestrians are injured by cars, they just remove the possibility of pedestrians being there in the first place. That's kind of more of a North American attitude. In Europe, would you say it's different?
Yeah, in fact, I think what you just said is something I feel like we don't talk enough about. One of the things that shocked me was, guess how many people globally are killed by cars every single year? 1.3 million people are violently killed by cars every single year on a global basis. 1.3 million. We don't even talk about it. We don't even talk about it. If there's a plane crash, it's front page news. Less than 1,000 people a year die of plane crash. 1.3 million people. There is nothing else in this world that kills 1.3 million people that we don't even talk about. When we first launched in cities, and every accident is too many. And once in a while, there would be a terrible accident, a fatality, and we get dragged in by the city. And they would say, somebody got killed on an e-bike. We got to ban e-bikes. 90+% of our serious accidents happen because a car hits you while you're on an e-bike or a scooter. And my question to them is, can you imagine walking down the street and a car hits you and kills you? And our question is, man, we got to ban walking. We got to ban walking. Who is actually at fault? In fact, when you look at what's going to drastically reduce accidents, we have to slow down cars. We have to rethink our road, not in 2 speeds. There are some cities where it's actually 1 speed, it's just the car speed. Increasingly, there's sidewalks, but there really are 3 speeds on the road. There's the bike speed, there's car speed, and then I also oftentimes hear is that we don't have the space for bike lane. Well, there are those 2 lanes of parking. Take one of them, you can create the best bike lanes out there. But this is absolutely part of the conversation we need to be having. Cars is going to have a place in our society, but when you look at the challenges that cars afford, they're one of the biggest sources of carbon pollution. They're the biggest in the Western world. They're the second biggest spend for the average American household. They're the source of parking challenges, congestion challenges, and they kill 1.3 million people a year. We got to challenge whether or not that is the dominant way we will move in cities for the foreseeable future.
Just a couple more things, and I would like to get some questions from the audience, so be prepared if you have any. Safety, do you teach people how to drive a scooter safely? I noticed that the lady, if we could bring that picture back up, who was on an e-bike, could we bring that picture back up? She was wearing a helmet, but I'm talking about people, and also flowers in the front, very nice. Do you teach people who use your bikes and scooters how they should drive safely?
We do. We have in-app training. On your first trip, we actually cap the speed you can go, so it's a little bit safer. We also do in-person trainings, kind of what we call first ride academies. We go into cities and teach people how to take that first ride. We also track our own safety record very, very closely. I was mentioning the challenge with cars, but we have to start with our own safety record. And when we look at our safety records, it's on par with pedal bikes. We got to do better than that, but it's actually roughly, there are no transportation that is 100% safe, but we do training in person, an app, and we want to make sure that we continue to bring down our safety incident rates.
Okay, you have a relationship with Uber. Would you explain to me what that relationship is, and how does your vision dovetail with the vision of Uber for cities?
Yeah, so I actually, earlier in my career, I joined Uber when it was 800 people. I was the general manager for California, which is where rideshare started, was the first market, biggest market for a long time. So I saw kind of the craziness of Uber, the good and the bad. And then when there was a CEO transition, that was pretty public at the time, and I became the chief of staff to the new CEO, Dara, who's the current CEO of Uber. And Uber has been an enormous supporter of Lime. They're our biggest investor. They own about a third of the company. They sit on our board, and we're globally integrated with Uber. So if you're in a city that has Uber and has Lime, you can access Lime directly on the Uber app. This is crucial, really, really important, because we can have a conversation with somebody who's about to take a car ride and say, are you sure? Are you sure you don't want to take a bike ride or a scooter ride? And the fact that we're integrated directly really, of course, lowers the transaction cost of signing up for a Lime trip. And the biggest thing, I think, for Lime is that distribution is expensive. CAC is expensive. Customer acquisition is expensive. And we have access to the biggest network of people looking to go from point A to point B for free. That is part of our long-term contract with Uber. And we're a major part of kind of Uber's vision, and they've been a very, very good friend to Lime and been the biggest supporter for Lime over the last 6 years.
So you're really painting a picture where we decide that we're going to go from A to B, and then we work out the best way of getting there with some sort of app or some sort of system, platform.
Exactly. In fact, we say our mission is, a full list of our mission is to build a future of transportation that is shared, affordable, and most importantly, carbon-free. The shared part is crucial. Shared meaning that versus personal ownership. The vast majority of transportation in the world is you own a car yourself. Why do we have the millions of cars parked outside? It's because everybody owns a car, and 96% of the time it's parked doing absolutely nothing. We had to do that because transportation is so crucial. For the 4 or 5% of the time I need to use it, I want to make sure it's there when I want it. But technology is enabling us not to do that. And when you own a vehicle, you're going to use it for everything, and you're going to buy for this kind of long tail events. The average car has 5 seats. Do you know what's the mode of number of passenger? 1. Look at any car. So why do we buy a car with 5 seats? We buy it because, the 2 cousins and my mom and my aunt may come. We're buying it for the long tail. So in the world of personal ownership, you buy for the long tail, you overconsume on cars, and you leave it outside across every single street park doing nothing. Imagine a future of shared transportation. You don't have to buy one thing for all the things you do. If you're going short distance, maybe you go on a bike. But if you have kids, you're not going to take your kids on a bike. Maybe there's a car for that instance. But 60% of car trips are under 5 miles. 60%. That is the overconsumption of transportation. That is precisely why transportation is the #1 source of carbon pollution. Imagine the 60% of car trips you can do a one-person car, a motorcycle, an e-bike, or an e-scooter. The vision of the future is shared. And when you start going to shared, you can now choose the mode that is best for the use case that you have.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tanya.